Welcome to Living Franciscan, a series of conversations with people who self-identify as following the Franciscan path of spiritual practice without necessarily being a member of a Franciscan order or even affiliated with the congregation. Now, these are intended to be pretty informal conversations, really just with the intention to open up our shared awareness of what it means to be Franciscan in the 21st century. So today I am happy to welcome Bill Schulz to talk with us today about what it means to him to be Franciscan. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you. It sounds wonderful, and I'm anxious to talk with you about it.
I think this will be fun. So, how do you identify as Franciscan? What does that mean to you?
I have my diploma up on the wall from the Franciscan school, so that's one way. Actually, that's a good reminder to me. Um, um, if it's okay, I'd like to go back in a little history of how I got to the Franciscan school and what it meant to me and what I've been doing afterwards as a result. Um, because I live in Maine, a long way from the campus at Berkeley, or San Diego for that matter. So it was a major decision that I made with Teresa, my wife at the time, and we, we both were coming home from work. We both had good jobs. We lived in a wonderful place. We were making really good money, and we would come home every night and say to each other, "What are we doing? Why are we doing this?" So we decided that we wanted to take a few years off. Thankfully, we were able to do that financially and go back to school. And the way we did that was we said, let's take a month and research and see what we want to do. And we had some specific criteria, public transportation, so on and so forth. And when we came back to the table, Teresa said, well, I want to go to University of San Francisco. And I said, well, I want to go to the Franciscan school in Berkeley. And so that's going to work out pretty well. And of course, Teresa did join us at Franciscan school as well. Um, I, I, I first, um, Francis first came into my life before I was even Catholic. I went with Teresa we both, I was going to the cathedral with her, and I had gone for a couple of years, and I think most people there thought I was Catholic. And we went on a trip with a wonderful group, and we went to Assisi. And I remember touching the walls, touching the stones, and just coming away thinking, um, Francis may have touched this wall. Um, I had, I had done some very sketchy reading about Francis before, and um, when we got back, I wanted more. There was something, whether it was the sunflowers down below the hill or just the beauty of the place and going to San Damiano and feeling the peace there. And there was, I needed more. I needed more. And in fact, shortly after, in 2000, I became Catholic and became very, very much into the life of the church, the life of the cathedral. Um, I sang in a beautiful choir. We sang a lot of polyphonic music, which really still makes me cry once in a while when I think about it. Um, um, and then, Teresa grew up Catholic. So, she had her own experience. And then I had mine, and that's when we decided, that's when it kind of, I think it occurred to both of us that there was something more that we wanted to do. And then, spending time there with students and faculty, people like Bill Short and Kennan and John Kiesler and Tito and you and Ramona,
Mhm.
all these people that, I remember you and I we did a rosary for a while once a week, and I still remember that, and I still remember those things. Um, and I, I didn't envision moving back to Maine after 3 years. My vision was to follow my heart and what had led me to the Franciscan school and Francis and Claire. I wanted to find out what it would mean for me to take the next step. And I didn't know what that would be, but I wanted to explore that. Teresa did not want to. She said, I'm having a grandchild soon and we're moving back. And so we did. And I I think I know I made a horrible mistake when we moved back because I went to work for the diocese,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, which was, hmm, I was so used to, um, I was so used to the way of life at the Franciscan school and Holy Hill and the friends I had made there. Um, and to make things worse, my job, I guess the bishop had looked at my experience in the business world and found it to be a match on for parish planning,
Mhm.
which at that time meant that I was to close parishes
Mhm.
and help in the decision making at a parish level of uh, combining parishes into one, closing churches, and we had to do it by consensus, as the bishop wanted. So Maine is a big state, and I drove almost nightly to one far-flung place or another and worked with parish. I brought parish councils together, and which is an interesting experience. It was in some places it was like getting in a boxing ring as a referee. Um, but and I remember um, like I'm 6'4", and there was a priest at one of the churches of a newly designed parish that had several churches, and we were closing this beautiful church
Mhm.
of his. And one night after the meeting, he got as close to in my face as he could get, and he was screaming at me, and spittle was flying, um, and so it was like that. Um, and then it became even more so because um, I was assigned on the org chart. I was responsible for Catholic schools. I was responsible for missions. I was responsible for um, youth ministry and other ministries. Um, what else? I guess that was enough. Which was more than I had this wonderful sister who was the superintendent of Catholic schools, and the the vibe at the time was to close schools for a financial reason, and she put up no resistance to it, and I was like, No, we have to fight for these as much as we possibly can, especially in, there, Maine is a pretty rural town, but there are a few cities where the schools were the place where immigrants could go, um, and I thought that was important. In fact, I went to the bishop one time with an org chart, and I said, Bishop, look, I have more work on here than you do, which I'm sure uh, he took that wonderfully. Um, and then there was a referendum in Maine on same-sex marriage. The bishop aligned himself with some pretty shady characters to get the money to do it and was very active in it. And I was very vocal about not supporting it, which I had a Monsignor come to my office one afternoon, closed the door behind him, and went, shh, pianissimo. Uh, and that's when I got my resume out. Um, and I should have listened to Francis before I made that move to become an employee of the diocese. But I did it for 6 or 7 years.
Okay.
I learned a lot about people. I learned a lot about the church. A lot of it was really good. I met a lot of wonderful people in parishes who were working hard at it and working hard at keeping the life in a parish. But I also, I spoke to somebody the other day and said, I worked in a chancery, and that's where they keep the chains. You know, it's where they keep the chains, and that's what I came to, and that's how I think of it now, as not a place for somebody who had just left the Franciscan school. Um, so at that point, I found another job, and it was the complete opposite. I was running an agency that ran group homes for adults with disabilities.
Mm.
And it was a wonderful job. And I just I it fed me so much after, doing what I had been doing. And then, Darlene, I made another mistake.
Mm.
I had an offer of a job for a job that would pay me a lot more money doing what I had done before I left for California. And I took it.
Mm.
And I got back to the same person that I had been before. It was more, more. I need more, more. I had a very expensive car. We actually moved several times, always trying to find a better house. Um, and it eventually and I started drinking heavily
Mm.
at that time, which it was the way that I thought I could um, that I wouldn't have to think about it, that I wouldn't have to think about what I had gone through at the school and what I had gone through in learning about Francis and Claire and the early brothers. Um, and so I was living with that um, it was suffering. I was suffering.
Mhm.
And I found uh, my addiction to alcohol as a way, I thought it was a way to just kind of wipe that out. But of course, it doesn't wipe out anything. It wiped out me, is what it did. Um, and so it also brought me to doing things that I'm not um, that brought pain to people that I love. And then um, after Teresa and I had built a new house and we had even better cars, and um, um, I did something was that broke our relationship in two. And I never lived in that beautiful new house ever again. I lost my job. Um, uh, and I was kind of crushed. I was crushed. Um, I had a suicide attempt,
Mhm.
which, now that I look back on it, I thought early on afterwards that it was the absolute downturn for me, and that I would never get back up because what I had done, if I had if I had put it on an application or for another job, they would do a background check and they would see that I had things in my background that they didn't want to support. So I did work again. I worked at Whole Foods as a cashier. I worked for what's called here 211 Maine, which is a helpline that anybody can call for anything. Um, and so my suicide attempt was 2 days before Christmas, like the darkest day of the year, um, the shortest day of the year, and the darkest night of the year. And I ended up in a psych hospital where I was able to take a breath. And this is all I'm getting to Francis again, believe me.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, I um, I actually found some peace at the hospital. Um, Being surrounded by people who I think were suffering as much or more than I was. Um, and before I got out, my son, who at that time was, I guess, probably in his early 30s, said, "Dad, you're going to come home and you're going to live with us." And I said, "Okay,"
Mhm.
which I never would have said before. But I said, "Okay." And they made a little room in the base, my granddaughter's. They had a little playroom in the basement, and then they had a little like closet off the playroom, and they put a little mattress in there and lots of blankets, and um, that's where I lived for a while. And got up every morning and went to an AA meeting. And then when I would come home in the afternoon, and all I could do was sleep. And my granddaughter, who was 5 at the time, often would come down in the afternoon and wake me up and say, "Poppy, Mom said we could watch two My Little Ponies this afternoon." So I'd go up and sit with her and watch My Little Pony, where I learned a lot of good things.
Mhm.
Um, and eventually, I found I found the community um, in Alcoholics Anonymous. I found the community um, that was only about love and only about the other
Mm.
and about putting a hand out to the other in whatever way that meant. And that began to light the pilot light, the Franciscan pilot light inside of me once again. Because um, it was just the beginning and it wasn't always lit, it wasn't always strongly lit. Um, but those people were there and it's a community of love and gratitude. My sponsor in AA, who's in his 80s and is German, says to me after every time we meet, he says, two things, Bill. Don't drink, help others.
Mm.
It's like, uh, the last part of that is Francis speaking to me, I think. Not looking for, not doing it to be recognized as doing it, not as something to pump up my own ego. Um, and in fact, um, don't even talk about it to others, because that isn't it. It's me having come back to life and recognizing what I want. I finally, even though, I was kind of a mess for quite a while, I was on the path to being able to do what I always wanted to do, who I always wanted to be. And it's interesting that I had never lived alone. Uh, I was I was 64 years old when that happened in 2016. I had never in my life lived alone. So I was in this little apartment, and I think the first or second day I was there, I realized that I needed another living creature with me. And so I went out and got a fish
Mm.
and called it Dave. And everybody knew about Dave and loved Dave. And so I guess that, now I go to prison and do meetings in prison. I go back to that psych hospital and do meetings there. The first time I did it was I was the first volunteer allowed back in the hospital after COVID.
Oh, wow.
So instead of a big meeting group, we were in this unit and then we went to this unit. I had been in this unit. So when we walked in, the staff person that I was with said, "We'll be meeting down in this conference room down on the left," which was directly across. This one makes me get a little weepy. It was directly across from the room
Mm.
where I stayed.
Mm.
Um, and it was somehow um, an awakening, I guess, an awakening to get back to what I had learned in my head.
Yeah.
I had it in my head at school. I had it in my head when I was, hanging out with Brother Short, who called me Brother Tall. Um, I had it, when I left, I had it in my head, but I didn't have it here yet.
Yeah.
And it took that crash, I think, for me for that person before to just not exist anymore. So that's my long story. Um, and so today I absolutely consider myself Franciscan. I found this is silly, but I found myself today in our kitchen, and there was a fly against the window, and first wanted to crush it. I just wanted to go whack. And then I thought, no, you can just open the window, Bill, and that fly will go out. Sometimes we have three cats, and sometimes, they bring in animals and they're alive. And, it's, I find it important and rewarding to, to not do them any harm and let them, get them back to where they belong. The other day, I was looking out my kitchen window and I could see some rustling in some grass. Some grass and straw we have by raised beds in front of our house. And I went out and it was a bird. It was a yellow warbler
Mm,
that had gotten caught in this grass
mm,
and couldn't get out. So it allowed me to pick it up. And
mm,
I held it in my hand for about 10 minutes while it was recovering, and I could go like this to it. And it just looked around. And then, as I was thinking, now what am I going to do? It went,
mm,
um,
mm,
and the more you see things like that or feel things like that, I find the more they happen, the more aware I am of them happening. Um, the uh, that God isn't out there, as I learned, but I didn't quite get it. That God isn't that that heaven is here, that heaven is within us and within um, the way we live. And I will finish with this. I remarried. I met a woman in AA, and you're not allowed to talk to the opposite sex in your first year because you have to focus on yourself. And when I celebrated my first year, we had heard each other for a year. We had heard everything about each other,
mm,
good and bad. And she came over and said, I've really enjoyed hearing you for the last year. And eventually we started to get together, and in a couple of weeks we will celebrate our sixth anniversary.
mm,
Um, yeah. So I guess that's probably the baseline of where I'm coming from at this point. Um, yeah, I, you know, everything isn't always wonderful. It's still kind of a struggle, and I still have to remind myself that I'm in recovery. Um, and but the more I work, the better I feel. The more I work, the more the more serenity I feel.
mm,
It's like, and it goes back to those first few days in Assisi,
mm,
putting my hands on the walls. I was able to go back. I've been back a few times, and I go to my favorite place on earth is Laverna, and it just it fills me. It fills me walking up into the hill. Um, and so the older I get, the longer I'm alive, the more um, I appreciate. I appreciate my life and I appreciate my time um, with Francis and Claire. The last time, and I will stop. The last time I was at San Damiano with a friend, and of course, we walked through the church, and the town itself was really busy. There was a festival where different neighborhoods were
Mm.
competing. So the place was packed, and then we walked down to San Damiano, and it was so quiet, and there were no crowds. So we walked through and, took that all in. And then I walked out behind the church building, and there's a little pool with fish in it.
Mhm.
Um, and it's so quiet, and there's an olive grove just beyond it. And it's like, drink this in, drink this peace in when you go back. So for when you go back. There, I'll leave with a fish pond behind San Damiano. And yeah,
Well,
does that make sense to you?
absolutely, absolutely. Because sometimes when I ask myself the question, or I ask other people the question, what does it mean to be Franciscan? We can often go to abstracts. Oh, it means
Hmm.
peacemaking, it means solidarity with the poor, it's incarnational, all these abstracts. But you have led us into what it means to be Franciscan through your life.
Yeah,
And it's that somatic learning. We really cannot, we can learn about the Franciscan tradition, but to learn and to live into this, we really have to break open all of this educational armor. That's what I call it. All
hmm,
of these abstract thoughts and this way of being so that we are deeply present.
yeah,
So much of your story really sounded very similar to me as the kind of learning that Francis did
yeah,
as he learned how to be with lepers.
yeah,
It's learning through and with our reactivity. We
yeah.
have these reactive habits and learning to notice them and then break them down so that we can be present with what is.
I think of Francis and um, setting out to be a knight, right? Which was so wrong. It was so wrong, but that's what he was kind of born into. But then realizing that, you know, this isn't me, but what is me? And how do I, how do I bring that back into the world where I have lived and be authentic? I think of him standing in the piazza and saying, you know, you're no longer my father. My father is in heaven. And I'm not saying, you know, my way was a little different than that. Um, my way was shame. My way was, I was shamed. And I had to live through a lot of resentment and anger at the church. I worked a lot with the priests in the diocese. I had some that I considered friends. I had one who was very isolated and many of them were very isolated. In Maine, you're isolated. And I would go and spend time with them, just talk with them. And there was one who was a particularly sad, wonderful man. And he was miles and miles away from another priest. And I said, Angelo, who do you pray with?
Mm.
How do you pray? He said, I don't need that.
Mm.
Um, and he was drinking a lot. He was very sad and isolated, and but I loved going and talking with him. Um, and then I sat with him in hospice. Um, and yeah. And then after I crashed, um, I had to deal with resentment at not a single priest calling just to see if I was okay.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
We don't condone what you did. Are you okay?
Yeah.
And, I went to confession once, and the priest basically turned his back on me. And so at that point, I left. I left it. Um, I kind of left it. It's still, the liturgical year is still like ingrained in me, and I still follow it, and I still pray Catholic prayers, and I have my beads here, and I still do a rosary.
Mm.
Um, um, you know, I've been reading every winter. My winter reading is Dante
Mm.
and the Divine Comedy, and this year and every year it's different. It's one of those. It's you read it differently every time you read it. And this time I realized at the end of hell, when he's finally there with Satan, and they're able to find the door to leave and get to get to purgatory. And the line is something like, "And we came once again to see the stars." And it's like, thank you, Dante. Thank you for that line. Um, and yeah, so there you go. I had recently, I have a couple of I have another master's in poetry,
Mm.
and I have a couple of new books in the last couple of years. And I was thinking this afternoon, I have a line in one poem. I think it is, "I freed God from the capital letter, and
Mm.
now I am free."
Mm. Yeah.
In our travels, Autumn and I, my wife and I, we like to go to this little town in southern Colorado called Crestone,
Oh, Crystal.
and it's kind of a spiritual center. And the lat we have found an ashram where we are welcomed and um, just feel like John Kiesler said, I think in Intro to Theology, I remember this line of his. He said, we all live in different villages, but we're on the same river.
Mm.
And, the ashram, where we love the people there. And this last time, in addition to going to the ashram, we went to a Sufi ceremony, which is all about love, all about love, all about forgiveness. The Allah for the Sufis, you know, they they um, they said to us, they said to me, Allah loves to forgive.
Mm.
Allah loves to forgive, and Yahweh loves to forgive, and the small g, God loves to forgive. Is I've come to believe kind of exists to forgive and love. So, yeah.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. There's just so much here that I could pick up on, but maybe that would just diminish. But I would like to ask you a question because you mentioned the Divine Comedy, but I know that your summer reading is Moby Dick.
Miss Moby Dick.
Mm.
I read it in grad school the first time around, um, when I was getting a master's in poetry, where I worked with Charles Simic, who was poet laureate, and I was just so blessed to work with him. And we lived in a student housing apartment about the size of this room, completely. And my first wife, um, who was wonderful, and we still have a wonderful friendship now that I've in recovery. She worked during the day while I was off, playing with poets. So I would do the middle of the night feeding.
Mm.
And I started reading it to him at night, in the middle of the night, in our tiny apartment. And um, that was 48 years ago.
Mm.
And every year on his birthday, I pick it up again. There were a couple of years when I listened to it. Um, but it's like Dante. It's every time I read it, it's different. There are those passages in the Bible when you read them, it's like, when did they put this into the Bible? I don't remember this part. Um, so Melville is that way to me, definitely. Yeah.
And I've seen you reference it a few times. And so I just purchased it I've
Ah,
never read it, but
ah,
you posted about it recently, and I thought, I really have to read this to understand it. And I think this is a very Franciscan thing. It's not uniquely Franciscan, but we influence each other and
hmm,
we have an effect on each other just by who
yeah,
we are.
yeah,
And
yeah. Social media has got a lot of wrong,
mm,
but one of the things that it does is, you know, I'm able to see what you're doing in your life,
mhm,
3,000 plus miles away from here, which is wonderful. I grieved when your dog died.
mhm.
It is those kinds of things are wonderful.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, um, it's kind of there, it definitely has its Franciscan moments, at the very beginning, um, when Ishmael finds his first place to spend a night, he's bunking out with this Aborigine. He thinks, oh, well, and he has this little carving that he prays to. And
Mm.
the first night, he's like, we have to be in the same bed. And he would call the innkeeper and say, I don't know if I can be in the same bed with this cannibal. And but when they wake up in the morning, Queequeg, the cannibal, has his arm over Ishmael in kind of a loving way. And they become like these one person, there, there's that. Yeah.
Oh, I look forward to reading it, and I hope that we can have a conversation or two or three around it in the future. Yeah, we're coming up on the end of our time, and there's just so much here. I guess I'd just like to open or ask you one final open-ended question, and that is there anything else about the Franciscan path or how you identify as being Franciscan that you'd like to include now?
Um, I do paint. I do write. And I want to send you one of my books that I think a lot of the poetry gets at this. Um, before I wrote to be recognized. I wrote with like mirrors around myself so I could see myself writing, and everybody was going to love these things that I was producing. And you know, since I died and came back to life, my writing is so much different. It's funny, I never thought about this before, but I write a lot about birds.
Mm,
I write there are a lot of birds in my, and there is in our neighborhood, which is pretty woodsy. Um, there's a Cooper's hawk that I've seen a few times, and it's just so amazingly beautiful and fast. And I've started writing about a poem about the Cooper's hawk. So, even in those kind of small ways, uh, it's in me. It isn't something that I just study any longer. It's something that I live um, in most everything I do.
way of being. Yeah. Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you for sharing all of this. It's has been a real privilege to listen to you speak about your life and offer so many candid remarks about your life. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about it. Um, I don't I don't talk about it very much. Um, yeah. So it was good for me. It was really good for me.
I'm glad. Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Okay.